Hi everyone, I work for Partners in Health. We're an international medical and social justice organization. We deliver high quality healthcare to millions of people in extremely poor and rural areas, and we use our success there to change global policy towards a world where everyone has the healthcare that is their human right. Some of our biggest wins have been massive increases in funding for tuberculosis and HIV care around the world from the US government, mostly USAID and PEPFAR. So if you've been paying attention to the news recently, you know we've had a pretty bad 2 months. Much of the world has. Not to make a joke out of this and put a button on it, we're talking probably 3.3 million dead in the next year because of these cuts. Yeah. So we've also had a remarkable month of fundraising, advocacy, and acquisition. Bad things happen. It's also up to us to make the best possible result from them. So we had that success because of preparation that we purposefully and accidentally accomplished over the last 18 months. And I'm just going to say some big numbers to get everyone's attention, even if that 3.3 million wasn't enough. We acquired more activists in the last month than we had in all of 2024, which is nice. We raised about $1.9 million, which is big for a February. We saw our 2 most popular social media campaigns of all time, which is nice, and facilitated about 20,000 emails to Congress, which is also pretty huge. So we thought it might be helpful to share what we've learned and what worked well for us in rapid response. Because unfortunately, rapid response to nonsense is a growth field these days. So some hygiene out of the way. I'm Riley Hay. I lead the email marketing team at PIH, so I think I'm like the most junior person here. But I've been in political organizing and nonprofit comms for about 10 years. That started in school. I've been at PIH for a bit over 6. And I've been on the emergency communications and response teams for about a dozen emergent events over my career, from fuel tanker explosions, deadly earthquakes, to the COVID-19 pandemic. That was a long one. And, like armed invasions of hospitals, that kind of thing. About a month ago, again, if you didn't know, the President of the United States announced a massive outrageous attack on global health funding around the world. And this is a recent example, and I've also only said bad things here, but when our plans are overtaken by events, whether they're natural disasters, political catastrophe, even maybe good news, like maybe Jennifer Garner gets on TV and says nice stuff about your organization, which is good, what's the first question that gets asked if anyone's ever done an emergency response? Should we respond publicly? This is the first one. But what else needs to get asked and answered before we actually get to market? Because this is, I think, the question that a lot of leadership thinks is, okay, we answer this question and we're done. There's a lot more. We got, who makes the call about we should respond publicly? We've got, what should we say? Who makes that call? Do we have info that the public should know about? Are we fundraising off this? Who makes that call? It goes on and on and on and on. Are we looking for unrestricted funding? Are we asking supporters to advocate? How can they do that? Who writes our content? And who writes the messaging the content is built off? Are they the same person? Are they on their honeymoon? Who acts first and who has to wait for them to finish their job? Who writes the copy? Who then approves the copy? That kind of stuff. Then you get into the actual fun ones. What kind of content does our audience need? What kind of content do we have access to create? How do we acquire people through this? And what do we do with the people we acquire? These are all things that we need to answer before we can go to market, which is a lot. So 10 days later, we launched the perfect campaign. Nothing happens. I'm sure this is familiar and frustrating state of affairs for everyone. And it sucks. It's the worst of both worlds, right? We get all the disruption, all the work, none of the acquisition, none of the fundraising, none of the benefits. Yeah, I'm sure we've all been there before. Has anyone been there before? Yeah, all right. So I think there's some things that we've learned over the last bit of time that can help us make that less of a problem. So the first thing we're gonna do is gonna name the problem, and then I'm gonna go through 5 things that you can do now during peacetime, during calm, that'll help during the storm. So, sound good? Cool. So, the simplest way to name the problem is it's the delay. It's the deadly delay between when information is available about an event and the action, the response begins. This quote is from our late founder, Dr. Paul Farmer. He's talking about HIV care and patients that the only patients they had that died in the first cohort in rural Haiti were people who started treatment too late. But he's also describing starting treatment for anyone in poverty. We always start too late. And they talk about this delay between when you know there's a problem and when you decide it's actually your responsibility to fix that problem. So, where does that delay come from? It's uncertainty plus laziness, which sounds grim, but it's true. And laziness isn't bad. It's this combo together that makes us roll low on initiative. Laziness is an immutable fact of humanity. We are efficient. We're fundamentally efficient. We don't want to do a desk wipe if there's not going to be a lot of benefit for it. You don't want to have to start something new if we're not going to get it. And this is good. We can clearly see that taking inefficient action, if it's not going to lead to something to make it worth it, we're not going to do it. So without the clarity of what breaking through and actually taking action produces, laziness wins every time. So what can we do other than just hire a bunch of go-getters? We have to define and attack the uncertainty. That uncertainty looks like three big things to me. A lot of times it looks like hope. The uncertainty looks like hope. It's hope that this won't be that big a deal. Maybe it'll blow over. It's hope that it isn't really my job to respond. Someone else is going to fix this. Someone else is going to do something. These two are solvable by leadership. Now, we've got a lot of senior leaders in the room, so I'm kind of talking about what it feels like to be led well. So hopefully it's a helpful perspective for y'all. These two are solvable by leadership. The last one is a lack of clarity on what your role is in the moment. I call this like the giant burger problem. You know, like a trendy restaurant, their burgers are so tall, and you look at it and you're like intimidated, and you're like, I don't know how to even start to bite this. Do I crush it? I don't know. So we're going to focus on the leadership stuff in the second thing to do right now. Probably should be the first. The rest of them are going to be about the giant burger problem. They're going to be about how to help people on your team start to bite that burger. Okay, little audience engagement moment. Who here remembers high school chemistry? A couple, okay. I was thinking, a bunch of nonprofit workers probably don't, but that's awesome. Who remembers this graph? Exothermic reactions. Yeah, so the classic example, it's gasoline and oxygen, right? It's not just going to light on fire on itself. You need to put in some activation energy. You need to use a lighter or hopefully a spark plug. A catalyst is a material that means you have to put in less activation energy to get that explosion. Hopefully, this clarity will be the catalyst. I know, I was a little bit on the nose. Whatever. Okay, so number one, build your welcome series is now. For all my HubSpot automation wonks out here, this is where HubSpot really shines because you can build a welcome series now and you can clone it and tweak it for the emergency. What's the one thing or the two things that happen with every nonprofit emergency marketing communications response? Huge acquisition, terrible retention, right? Wow, look how great our numbers are a year later. Where'd all our supporters go? For anyone in leadership, that means you spam welcome series. That's how we solve the problem, right? This big email automation, maybe it brings in texts, maybe if you're really smart, it brings in mail, and this stewards the relationship between the donor and the organization, and it introduces them to all the great things you do, and hopefully improves retention. Don't try to build this during an emergency. This is insane. This is cascading logic that checks whether or not they're a recurring donor or a one-time donor. Every time it sends an email, it branches. You can't do this during an emergency. This is something to build now, and build it as sophisticatedly as possible so that when you're cloning and tweaking, all you have to do is change one or two words and it suddenly applies to your emergency. So my first piece of advice is get sophisticated in the template and dumb in the tweaks. Sophisticated in the template, dumb in the tweaks. Producing new content in response to an event means research, drafting, approvals, execution. No way around that, but that effort should be saved for the assets you're putting into market, right? Not the assets that you're trying to run in the background, stewarding the people you acquire. Attempting to run this process for the Welcome Series is a huge waste of time. It'll gum up the works of your whole shop. Instead, trust that a mostly generic Welcome Series will do the trick if it's extremely personalized to the donor. Because a Welcome Series is about the relationship between the donor and the organization. It's not about what brought them in. So, it's not about the disaster. That means that personalization counts and will not be about the event, but rather about the things you can plan for now. Is this going to be personalized based on their location? We can set that up now because we know that when they sign up, they're going to give us their location. Is it going to be personalized based on whether they're a non-donor, recurring donor, one-time giver? We can set up all that logic now, and they will feel like they've been seen by the organization and that this Welcome Series is relevant to them because it's relevant in the ways that we can plan for. Our Welcome Series for this most recent disaster, we cloned it and we changed 4 words in the first sentence that responded to the US administration, like, thank you for your gift, doing blah, 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 and then it was generic the rest of the way through. That was at launch. A couple days in, we made some changes to the later iterations of the Welcome Series, like the later sends, and that's something that's really cool about these too, is you can launch super generic and know that it takes them 2 weeks to get through the whole thing. That means you've got 2 weeks to build your second, third, fourth sends, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Seeing some nods, cool. Okay, this one probably should have been first. Get your leadership buy-in now. The biggest asset towards clarity in a crisis is leadership. If leaders can answer the big questions fast and activate teams clearly and quickly, the tone's set for a strong response throughout the emergency response. But I can talk about specifically what anyone who isn't in a leadership role can do to manage up. It's hard work, no way around it. Basically, we gotta get leaders to agree to the stuff we need now and then socialize those agreements across our teams now. Any effort you put into this in the calm will pay dividends during the storm, in my experience. The most important tool leaders have in a crisis is the ability to give your entire team what we call an oh shit moment at the same time. This is a welcome to a state of exception. Things are different now. Wipe your desks, the priority changed. Now we're all activating on this. Tell your leaders you need that in order to activate a good emergency response. The hardest part about this is practice, right? Because how do you practice crisis leadership without a crisis? I've never successfully done it. So one key aspect here is to create names for things that you need from leaders and then use those names during regular operations. So an example, a list of decisions you need to activate an emergency response. We have the names for these things. We call it the fundraising go, no-go decision. We've got the designation decision. Is this going to be unrestricted or is it going to be a restricted fund? We talk about the messaging tone decision. And these are things where I can say, hey, Sandy, I need a fundraising go, no-go decision. And then she knows exactly what it is that I need. We talk about these decisions for our planned campaigns as well. So in the campaign planning process, we say, can I have a fundraising go, no-go decision for Mother's Day? Are we fundraising or not? Yeah. Define an approvals process, and please make it linear. A linear approval process has an end. It's somebody who signs off and it's done. I'm sure we've all had that situation where your asset gets in a merry-go-round of edits, right? We want the subject matter expert edits, and then we're going to send that to final approval, but then they're going to send it to a subject matter expert, and it goes forever, and then slop comes out 4 days later. What to do when the process fails, and let's talk about approval modes and levels of trust in the moment. We have 3 approval modes right now. We have full approval. That means before we hit send, the CEO looks at the final product. That's really slow, really clunky. It's for a moment of extreme precision and lack of trust. We also have pre-approved messaging approval. This is The messaging document gets approved by all the people who need to, and we're trusted to build off that and send because they know that we're not going to stray too far from the messaging. That we can read, comprehend, and write. Finally, we have something we call dead hand approval, which is I send this to the final approver, and if I don't hear back in 2 hours, I have carte blanche to hit send. This is for the moment when speed matters more than anything, and it requires trust. We didn't debut dead hand approval during an emergency. We debuted dead hand approval during, I think it's some like October campaign, and just to try it out, see how it works. We have to develop that. There's like a famous quote that like we move at the speed of trust, right? And so we have to develop that trust now and throughout normal times so that we can move fast when we need to. Okay. Yeah, also naming meetings. Like name the point of the meeting. So the desk wipe all hands, that's your give everyone their oh shit moment meeting. The decision communication meeting, that's a, hey, something has been decided and that activates you, so that can be smaller groups. Situation reports, as crises become more chronic, you end up having to have weekly situation reports where like, hey, here's what's happened in the last week, let's make sure everyone's on the same page before we all break for the weekend. If we're doing that, yeah, my last thing is like really use these names all the time because it means that you've developed a shorthand in times when shorthands are necessary. Okay, let's talk about know your role. To me, this is the most important aspect of any activation strategy. The image that comes to mind, anyone taking the CPR class? Kind of scared to be in this room. Is it 2? 3, okay. When a CPR is going, when like someone is down and you're working on someone, what do they say? You don't say, somebody call 911, because everyone will assume someone else did and sit there and watch the action. You say, you call 911, and you know it's you, right? That's your job now. We need to do this for all of our work. So let's talk about the way we work. Generally, we love to work in sequence. You write the messaging, you get it approved. I write the email copy, it gets approved. Then we work on the landing page and ask the graphics team for graphics now that we know what the copy is and all the messaging. Social media writes the post based on the landing page copy so that it all works together. Everyone waits their turn, nobody wastes any effort going in the wrong direction. And while we wait, we work on other projects, right? We've all got stuff we need to do. We've got that report due, whatever. It's efficient, it's pleasant, no one feels frustrated, and it's deadly slow. So in an emergency, we need to work in parallel. That means writing 3 versions of landing page copy because you don't have the messaging yet and you're not sure where we're going to land. It means tweaking it to match the final messaging once you get it to yourself. It means getting started in graphic design before you have email copy. And starting to build a donation page before the are we fundraising question has even been answered. We got to take time now to designate what working in parallel looks like for each function, and clearly teach our teams that the 2 modes of working even exist, right? Like how many people have a team who talk like this about working in parallel or working in sequence? No, I made it up. So this is kind of like a diagram of what workflow like that might look like. This is how we like our flowcharts to be. This sucks. But that's the only way. You see it literally ends sooner. And that's because I'm good at graphic design. It's my passion. But this is how we need to work in a situation where every second counts. So it's messy, it's annoying, it's inefficient. And it requires a team to have a strong tolerance for uncertainty and a strong tolerance for wasted effort. One way to make it easier is to establish with extreme clarity what is expected of each person when we're working in parallel. So that is you're sitting down with a graphic designer and saying, when we have the oh shit meeting, your next step is to build 4 templates of intense fundraising graphics and wait for copy. Whatever that looks like for your team. If your graphic designer is the same person as other stuff, then everyone knows that you just work as fast as you can. Key here is to find the tasks that nobody owns, that everyone kind of pitches in and does once in a while. Find them, assign them right now. Most of those are deciding tasks, not building tasks. Most decisions, we like to be egalitarian workforces where we kind of come together and make decisions as a collective. That's a situation where nobody owns the task, even if the task is making a call. In a situation where stuff is going bad, the decisions need to be much more like authoritarian, almost. It needs to be, this is my job, I'm making this call, let's go. I hate to use the word chain of command, but c'est la guerre. Okay, let's talk about priorities. I don't know about your orgs, but my team is always talking about prioritization, and generally that just means a lot of things are labeled must do. We are chronically understaffed and underfunded as an industry. We pick big problems to try to solve, and we have like 8 people to do them. An emergency response is a moment where unless staff have permission to drop some balls on purpose, they're not going to be able to react to and catch the balls that the events are throwing at us. We need to know it's okay to drop stuff. So this is some like useful stuff. Let's talk about what to not drop. So we divide right now, soon, and later. Notice none of those actually are don't do. So this is stuff that every second it happens later, it gets worse, right? This is the stuff you need to get out as fast as possible. Actually, there should be a welcome series in there, but messaging, the first social post, your first call to action, your first emails, press outreach, photo curation and graphic production, that's got to start now. Someone needs to be doing some information and content gathering. So this is like finding out more information than is readily available in the press, the stuff that your organization organically generates. Soon. This is the second wave of follow-up. This is stuff that we got to start relatively soon because within a day, your first interaction, your first reaction can be really fast, and then you sit there watching the money come in. And you haven't done the second email or the third email because you're watching how that first one's doing. So this second wave is actually really, really important. We had a guy from Doctors Without Borders come in and say, in your crisis response, the first thing you do is you bench a third of your team. I'm like, what? What do you mean a third of our team? You bench a third of your team because in 3 days when your team is burnt out, they're gonna come in and they're gonna, be your reinforcements. And I was like, you have no idea how small our team is. That'd be awesome. I'd love if I could have a benchable third of my team. But thinking about what that second wave looks like as the first wave is working is really important. So when I say first content delivery there, what I'm talking about is your not the email, not the social media post. I'm talking about the 2-minute video direct to camera talking about the situation. That started to get produced in the right now, begin information and content gathering, but it's not going to be delivered until your second wave. Your first wave is much lower budget than that. It might not even have graphics. The second wave is when you start getting some, higher production value. We did our first ever direct-to-camera talking short-form video last month, 5 years late, and it blew up because people really want to have that. Let's talk about maybe put new ads in market, depending on how long this crisis is going to last. Maybe you start a direct mail rapid production, depending again on how long you think this crisis is going to last. In this phase, this is like a day later, you start to understand how long this thing might be going on. If it was a fuel tanker explosion, it's a fuel tanker explosion. You're done. If it's a long-term trend in the US government, that might take a lot longer. It's time to start thinking about what high-value content that you can produce that would bring attention to your organization. Okay, later, everything else. Your regularly scheduled programming, medium-term projects, project management. Working in parallel is not the time to be pinging people about Asana tasks. I will die on this hill. And documentation, right? We love to document what we did and talk about all this stuff. Later, you're gonna remember it, don't worry. It's time for speed. And also, we don't need to know exactly what the conversion rate on each page is. We need vibes. Yeah, that's doing well, let's keep doing that. That page, I tested the donation and it's working, it's not 0, that kind of thing. Come on. Oh, that's right, okay. Practice. Let's talk about practice. We're talking about practice? Okay. Emergencies are rare and high pressure, which is a recipe for friction. So we need to find ways to practice. And I'm sure everyone's heard what the best way to practice is, but you're not going to do it. I'll take credit for that. The gold standard of emergency preparedness is a playbook, which is a binder full of flowcharts and SOPs. Everyone's break glass in case of emergency. You open it up, you say, okay, the first thing I need to do is this. The second thing I need to do is this. Everyone has their own. And then you run a war game, right? You get your whole team together and you drill it. You have a fake emergency. Someone comes up with a situation, and if you have the time and resources to do this, please do it. But I don't think you do. For the rest of us, don't wait around for your leaders to make this happen. It's not gonna. Has anyone done this? Cool. Also, this isn't a talk about the things you can do at your next retreat in 2027 unless you don't have budget cuts. Like, this is a talk about things you can do right now. So how are we gonna get the same learning and confidence that we would get from a drill, and crucially, that same trust in our that also moves us towards our regular goals? Synthetic responses. You've heard of like practice like you play, right? Get ready for playing like you're practicing. I don't know, we'll workshop it. The idea here is that you use your regular campaigns to practice building the structural clarity and trust you need in an emergency response. My notes just say a story about working with the advocacy team. My team, Comms, had a bad relationship with our advocacy team, and nobody knew why. It was like old enough and we'd had enough turnover that it was just like, it just wasn't working. And we're an activist organization. We do care delivery and policy change. The advocacy team is like essential to a credible emergency response. So I got a beer with a couple of our advocacy folks, and I said, we haven't had any wins together for the last, 4 years. Let's get 3 of us on each team and work on a couple planned campaigns in 2024 where we're gonna create synthetic advocacy moments. And we're gonna try to activate as complicated as we can, start off pretty slow, but we're gonna do email and social and get a couple people on the Hill at the same time. Get a couple wins. Maybe that'll build some trust between our team. We did great. We had 4 or 5 campaigns over the course of 2024, the largest Hill Day for tuberculosis ever. Stuff was going well. But what it meant was we had greased the skids on working together across silos in a situation where we were moving slowly, but we were doing all the things that you do in an emergency. And this is key here, is that in an emergency, a credible response from an organization in an emergency is one where you can see that the organization is doing everything they can. We love to run our campaigns in our structural silos. So the fundraising team is going to run a fundraising campaign. The advocacy team is going to run an advocacy campaign. The engagement team is going to run a let's get this nice story campaign. In an emergency, the most credible response is the one where the organization is doing all of that at the same time, because things are bad. We need money, we need policy change immediately, we need the government involved, we need awareness. So you're doing full spectrum across the channels work. But our regular campaigns, we don't love to do that because that's a ton of work. You got to sit in a bunch of interdepartmental meetings. I don't know the size of the organization you're in, but it could be 4 people, it could be 30 people. That's rough. Some of the ways that working like this in a synthetic emergency response for your regular campaign, our campaigns tend to thrive on synthetic urgency anyways, right? We want to give a feeling that you need to donate right now, not in 4 weeks when you get to it. So doing a synthetic emergency response actually helps that synthetic urgency, if that makes sense. Acting like you're working in an emergency makes it feel more real to your supporters, I believe. This is not efficient work. This is work where if you're practicing or playing like you practice, you're going to be wasting time in terms of the most efficient way to get the best bang for your buck in the market during a normal time. But I urge you to not take shortcuts. Always include an acquisition element, an acquisition page with a new welcome series, even if you're only gonna have 8 people come into it. Always expand your tent and work with the teams that they're gonna slow down the meeting because they're in there, but it's good for them to get exposure to it. Spin up tracking for every campaign. We love the idea of, I'm gonna bucket all the people I got during this emergency so I can track them long term. Do that for every campaign that you're gonna be acquiring people. They may be buckets with 9 people in them, but you're practicing that muscle and that skill. Okay. Oh, and this is the least popular one. Decide to run some of your campaigns in parallel instead of in sequence. Don't do it for end of year. And just like defining emergencies for a second, an emergency is a situation that you didn't see coming or you didn't have like on your calendar where speed matters. Giving Tuesday is not an emergency. Don't treat it as such. But we can treat maybe our Mother's Day campaign as if it was an emergency. And if we get everything done 6 weeks before Mother's Day because we started 7 weeks before Mother's Day and we worked in parallel, okay, that's a win. Now it's just cooked and ready to go. Okay, this is my last slide. This is crazy. So life happens. People get sick. Actually, the best thing you can do to make sure an emergency happens is to tell your social media manager it's okay to get married and go on their honeymoon. It's crucial to make sure that each of your mission-critical tasks has 2 people trained to take over. If you are a 2-person shop, both people need to know how to do everything. The classic, like 1 is 0, 2 is 1, 3 is better. I think that's for like knives or something. But here's where this can run into some problems. If everybody's cross-trained, and these synthetic emergency responses are a great time to cross-train people, right? There's a great time for you to be like, actually, you're benched for this whole campaign. We gotta see if we can do it without you. The problem is that doesn't mean it's now 3 people's job to do this. These are understudies, not co-stars. So it's important to make sure that multiple people can do every job, but in normal times, every job has 1 owner because that avoids the somebody call 911 problem. So capability is important. Clarity of responsibility is also important. That's it.
All right, we've got space for questions for Riley, so let's fire away. Let's put him on the spot.
That's a great question. I would say that, clearly the whole point of this talk is to do it now, not during an emergency, and make people know that like, if they want input, they need to commit to speed. So if they want to review, they need to commit that when they get that document, no matter what time of night it is, in an emergency, they're reviewing and sending it back to you in 20 minutes. Because it doesn't take longer than that to read a fundraising email. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Also, clarify the role of the reviewer. So the subject matter expert is not editing for style. The CEO is editing for big reputational problems, not, I actually would prefer we use the term catchment area. That doesn't happen in my work. I'm just like saying that I've dealt with that before, because this is being recorded. But that'd be my main thing. And then I would also say that like picking your battles and don't fight that battle during the crisis. So recognize that if there's someone who's in the leadership team who is gonna go in and they're gonna remove every apostrophe and take out those contractions, you might have to just deal with that during an emergency. But if you know that now, you can plan for what it requires otherwise. And then the last thing I'll say is screw some stuff up, like not on purpose, but like I think that like shops are really scared to send something out that's wrong if they've never done it. But if you've accidentally said a fact that isn't true on one of your Instagram posts, it's not the end of the world. You just comment a retraction. Comment on your post and say, hey, that was actually not quite right. Stuff is moving fast. This is actually what the deal is. And that actually increases trust in your brand. Because, I trust a newspaper that prints retractions or corrections. So that's what I would say is that like socialize it's okay to mess up because we have to move fast. We're not very good at this. But I think that it's really key for that first oh shit meeting, because like the biggest deal is taking someone out of regularly scheduled programming into crisis response. Like you got to get their heart rate up a little bit and have them ready to lock in for 4 hours at their computer. And so I would say that that one is a really try not to miss this meeting. And the other thing I would say is that we tend to post summaries of meetings. And if someone wasn't there, their manager is really key for promulgating that information. Like if our graphic designer couldn't, I keep picking on graphic design. If our graphic designer couldn't make it to that meeting because they were driving or something like that, their manager, our creative director, having been in the oh shit meeting and communicating that urgency is really, really key. And then, we've got a Slack channel where you send all the stuff and the summaries of the meetings, but like, there's nothing more aseptic than like a bulleted point summary of an oh shit meeting. It just doesn't have the same vibes. But I say like, don't hesitate to get dramatic. Like it is dramatic, be dramatic about it. Online communities suck compared to real life interaction. So I would say, make sure that the means don't become ends, right? Like having a proactive community on Slack is a means to having a good volunteer core, not an end in itself. And then for activation and anger, I have found that there's like a despair hope, axis. Despair is obviously useless, but hope is kind of tranquilizing too. I think that we want like anger and action or inaction, right? And providing people with, I really like the idea that you have of like having the Slack be open to them, because in my experience, one of the most galvanizing things is when the curtain is pulled back a little bit and you treat the people you're trying to get to do stuff like insiders, and you give them that inside info. Like, hey, I was just in this meeting, X, Y, and Z is happening. One way to do that is it can't be polished. It can't be corporate speak. It can't sound like an AI might have written it. No offense to HubSpot with the AI stuff. But it has to be like a coworker sending you a Slack, like, oh, did you see this? This is awful. Here's this thing you can do right now, and it'll actually provide some help. I would also say that like providing people an opportunity to do something about it, even if it's tangentially related, is huge. Action is the antidote to despair.
Thanks, so Riley, thank you for your presentation. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Yeah, thank you.